Today on the Wet Fly Swing podcast, we've got Zach Pope from TroutRoutes.com. Zach is the founder of one of the best mapping tools in the country. Zach is going to deliver the goods today, and you are going to get 3 big takeaways on today's episode on top of everything else. You are going to learn where the trout live in every state and every spot in the lower 48 of the U.S. That is every trout stream in the country. You're going to find out in the lower 48 where all of the public water, so you know exactly where you can access, where you can access. You're going to get that. And we're going to find out about a master class they have going where if you want to get more information and you don't have this tool right now, you can find out where to get that. Plus, we're going to get you a bonus today. We are going to be talking about the 3 states that do not have trout. That's the bonus today. You're going to find out which 3 states don't have trout. This is a great tool. Here we go. Zach Pope from TroutRoutes.com. How you doing, Zach?
Good. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together today. We've got a great episode ahead. We're going to talk, not only mapping and how people can utilize trout routes and other kind of mapping tools, but just your background, how you got into it. I'm interested to hear because you guys have one of the, I think, one of the best products out there in this space. So let's start with your fishing. I always like to go there. Kind of fly fishing. How'd you get into it, and what's your first memory?
Yeah, my first memory of fly fishing is actually, it's kind of a funny story. So my grandpa passed away before I was born, so I never met him. But when I was about 16, we were cleaning out my grandma's garage, and I kind of came across what I later learned was like this crazy fiberglass. It almost looks like a broomstick. It's just, we just found out it's like a 7-weight, 9-foot, pretty cool looking fly rod. I remember when I first came across that, I was really intrigued, for 2 reasons. Number one, it was clearly my grandpa's, so I kind of had that like calling to try to figure out, what was it all about and kind of what was his style. And then also I was always intrigued even before that about, the sport of fly fishing. And so from then on, I kind of just took it and ran with it. And even to this day, I don't really have a ton of people in my immediate, family or friend circle that fly fish. And so for those first, 6 years, it was a lot of kind of DIY, kind of exploring on your own and trying to learn on your own. But I spent like the first couple of years, trying it out at the local lakes here in Minnesota, doing panfish. But I mean, I was hooked right from day one. I do joke that it took probably, I think it was like 6 or 7 years, where I would, I got into fly fishing really just on my own. Had took no classes and read very few books. And it took 7 years before I caught my first trout. And it wasn't until my first trip to the Black Hills, actually, that I got my first brown trout. So, it's been a long journey. I've been doing it for, 20 or so years and never looking back. And it's been great.
Nice. And do you remember that first fish pretty well, that first time you caught? I'm assuming you caught other species, but this was your first trout?
Yeah, I did, panfish here and there, but that was, I was very focused at catching a trout for 7 years. I loved exploring. I mean, one of the histories behind trout routes is just an ultimate passion on exploring and finding new places to kind of get lost in the cold water, fishery scene. And when I first finally got that brown trout on the line, it was just like a feeling I'll never forget. I know the exact place. I know the fly rod. I know the fly. It was great. That's
awesome. And the rod was, like you said, your grandfather. And so were your parents not into the fishing, the outdoors as much?
They do a little bit of like general, fishing, but we'd go to like family cabins here and there, but no one fly fishes. So I was kind of the first in the family to kind of take on fly fishing. And the full story is like, once I got my hands on that first fly rod, and it's funny, we just found it in my garage actually last week. And now it's on our wall at our Trout Routes office in Northeast Minneapolis, pretty much as a museum. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, what happened is I took it to like the local, fishing store, and they looked at it and basically said, go away. And so I ended up just buying like the easiest starter kit basically, and kind of went from there. So my first brown trout in the Black Hills was not on that fly rod. I didn't kill a lot on that rod.
Oh, sure. Gotcha. Okay. Nice. So you got this thing going. So you have this passion, and then so it's a big where you are now with Trout Routes and this product, this app, this mapping tool. Like, when did that idea first come to be?
Well, the first like I would say 10 years in fly fishing, I was very excited about getting lost and finding myself in new places. And where I started in Minnesota, there's a ton of really good resources that are, public and put up by the Minnesota DNR. And the same goes for Wisconsin and even Iowa for that matter. But I still always really struggled to find good resources that had interactive, comprehensive information for where to go. And so what I learned is that, as much as I love to explore, most of my time exploring was in my car and not on the water. And so, my background's software, electrical engineering. I did, 10, 12 years in medical devices and some other stuff. And so eventually over time, I just kind of really got passionate about kind of documenting and kind of planning where I wanted to go through, I would say like offline research. So at home, look at maps. There was a couple of years before Trout Routes where I would by hand in Google Maps trace out like the rivers that I wanted to go. And so I know this is kind of a long answer, but I remember my first time making my first trip to Montana. I was 24, I think I was 23, 24. And it was just like a dream for like 15 years. Never could stop thinking about Montana, couldn't stop hearing about it. But when you do your first trip to Montana, at this point I was doing it solo, it's pretty intimidating, right? It's a massive state. All you hear about are these 15 major rivers, the Yellowstone, the Madison, the Beaverhead, Gallatin. And the problem for me is, having never been there, I don't have any context to where these rivers are, or more importantly, where the rivers that aren't mentioned are. And so, the Yellowstone's 500 some miles long, even the trout waters are. So even back then, when I was 24, I was hand mapping out, I was basically making trout routes by hand in Google Maps. And then it wasn't until 2018 when I actually filed for an LLC. And the initial idea behind the first kind of go at the LLC was actually low-cost turbidity sensing. And the idea there was, there's a lot of these USGS, primarily USGS, streamflow gauges that are, sprinkled through all these waters. And most of them have flow, most of them have height, some of them have temperature. My issue, and I think a lot of us, is that there's just not that many of them. And so I think we want a little bit more granularity in more rivers to kind of get a feel for real-time conditions. The problem is that they're super expensive. They're they're generally ran by the government. There's some private stuff going on. But so my idea was I would come up and design this low-cost kind of IoT turbidity sensor. And I actually built a 7-foot pond in my backyard, all while I had a full-time job. And I actually went to the USGS labs here in Minnesota. I don't even remember how I got in. I think I just broke in or whatever I did. And I actually have a picture to this day where I walked into like the USGS national labs in Minnesota with a laundry basket. And in the laundry basket was a cable to a little PVC pill that I made at Home Depot. And that was like my prototype for testing. And then an hour later, I left because they essentially kindly asked me to leave from just how horrible. I basically went in there and I thought I had something, working, and there's this is never going to work. You need to get out. And so from then I kind of said, let's take a step back and just focus on the mapping part, because my long-term vision was always to do a consumer-facing product that had, fully vertically integrated sensors in the field. And so if the sensor thing is really hard, let's first just nail the mapping part, and then we can worry about hardware integration later. And kind of the rest is history. We launched the first mapping product in March of 2019 at the St. Paul Fly Fishing Expo as kind of a way to, get something out there and see what people thought. And I mean, honestly, from there, I remember that day that we launched at the St. Paul Expo. I told my family and friends I was quitting my job that day, and I did 7 months,
really?
7 months later. Yeah.
No kidding, because you knew. What did you know at that show? That were you planning that, or did you find something at that show that made you realize you're ready to quit?
Yeah, it was a huge, aha moment, because I really feel like my background in the fly fishing space has felt, at least up until recently, like more of an outsider, someone that doesn't necessarily feel like I was born into it, and I've kind of had to work my way into it. So coming into that fly fishing expo the year before, I had attended as like a attendee, and I was kind of nervous and kind of felt like kind of the outsider going into that, even though I loved the community in the sport. I was still feeling kind of like I still had so much to learn. And to then go and have a booth where I was showcasing something that I built was an extraordinary experience. And I had no idea what to expect. And at the time, it was essentially a free product, a free map that I was just kind of throwing out there to see what people thought. And when I saw the reaction from a pretty large, engaged audience in St. Paul, it was so profound that I knew exactly that this was for sure going to be at least something I could make into a small business, if not something more. So it was a very memorable experience.
That's cool. So I think, when I think about, just Trout routes or just mapping software in general, and this might have come up something I read about it, but I always think of my own kind of like you, the Gazetteer, the Delorme Gazetteer, which I still have one in my truck, the Gazetteer, you're marking all your spots. So talk about, is that kind of what Trout Routes is doing for digitally? Is that kind of some of the thinking behind it?
Yeah, it's basically taking what folks were familiar with for the gazetteers, and these days it's Google Maps, or many folks who hunt would probably know Onyx Maps, Onyx Hunt. We're very similar to Onyx Hunt, but we're extremely focused on moving trout waters. So that's not necessarily only people that fly fish, it's anyone that fishes for trout in moving waters. And that sounds fairly specific, but it's actually intended to be holistically covering anything that has inland trout and soon to be migratory cold water species. We believe one of the best in the country that has those mapped out.
That's it. And I'm very familiar with Onyx because they have a lot of good tools. I'm not even a giant hunter, but I love the land ownership. In fact, that was something when we were out in New York, and with the mapping, being able to, you're in a public spot, and then there's this private section, being able to know. And now talk about, I want to get into that a little bit, because we have kind of that piece, but just in general, before we dig into some of that, maybe talk about high level, what are the few things that people would utilize a tool like this for? Obviously it's a map, but if you had to break it down into a few kind of bullets, what would that be?
Yeah, there's two major problems that we solve really, really well. The first is not knowing where trout live, so which streams and which sections have trout. We've solved that now, where we have what we believe is the first of its kind national data set of every single trout stream that has inland trout. We believe we don't have a single river now that doesn't have trout that isn't in our maps, which is extraordinary. It's taken 6 years to do that. And
let's step back, because that's a pretty huge, awesome thing. So basically, we got all these trout, right? Tons of species, different trout you can name. I don't know how many different species of even cutthroat there are. But so you're saying you guys have mapped out pretty much all in the U.S. trout waters?
100%. That has been our mission since 2019, and we finished January of this year.
Wow.
And when I say finished, there's always going to be continuous improvement. There's going to be new features. There's going to be a new parking lot that we add. But the feat of mapping out every stream or river that has inland trout any time of the year, stocked or wild, has never been done. And we just finished that in January. So we're super psyched about just having that feat alone. And then what we do is we overlap that with a very comprehensive set of layers for public access. And that's the second problem that we solve. Number one is, where are there trout? And number two is, how do we publicly access that trout stream? We do those two problems extraordinarily well. And then we add a bunch of features on top.
So there's two major things those are two of the biggest things. Yeah, where are the trout? And then what are the access points? And that was something I found, is that as we were out there, I'd never been to New York fishing. And as we were going around, definitely they were spot on these points. And some of them were an access point where it was all private property, but right off a bridge, next to a bridge, there was a little point, a trail sort of thing. So how did you guys, some of this is probably stuff you can't reveal and things like that, but is a lot of this information out there just for the general public? Or, it seems like a pretty huge task to put all this together.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would say probably 60% or so is us taking, at this point, thousands of different data sets. And that can be from a state level, a county level, even a town might have a data set on local parks, or it could even be on the national level. Like the National Park Service might have a layer of all the campsites in all the national parks. And what we do over the many years has been to come up with a very novel process of bringing all those layers together and synthesizing it and creating consumer software on top that lets us anglers make good insights about where to go on top of that. So at this point, the hard part is A, finding the data, and then B, bringing that into a cohesive national data set. The other 40% is where we have to, using our knowledge in the field, come up with hand-curated content in the maps. So for example, having known some of the major rivers in Colorado and Montana and Wyoming, what we would do is find out that there are some missing trails that we don't have, and we would by hand have to add in certain trails that we know are very valuable access points for major rivers. And in some cases, we'll hand curate even polygons that are fishing easements. So for example, there are a couple counties in Colorado. Colorado, by the way, was by far the hardest state. Super complex, won't get into it. But there's a county in Colorado that has, I think it's like 21 miles of public stream fishing easement access, which is a very unique part of private land that offers access just for fishing to a gold medal river in Colorado. And if you're from Colorado or you fish there, gold medal is like, top tier, most public, most productive fishery. And there's 20 miles of public access that isn't even in Onyx Hunt, and it's in no other app. It's only data available directly from the county that we had to map out by hand. So it's taking public data, yes, but it's also taking our passion and focus in trout stream access and bringing in curated content on top of that.
Gotcha. Wow, that's cool. And so some of the, I think you've probably dealt with this a lot, some of the maybe objections to some of this, and maybe you could clarify, but the crowdsourcing piece, people are worried about the spot burning and stuff. Talk about that a little bit, how you guys deal with that.
Yeah, that's been a huge part of the learning experience of the whole project. And I think the main theme is just a general misunderstanding of what we do. So there's a lot of software out there. There's a lot of apps out there that are dependent on consumer generated content. So things like if you're on Google Maps and you want to look for the nearest taco place, I'm famous for loving tacos, you're kind of dependent on having good reviews, good photos, the 4.5 stars. All of that value is dependent on consumers adding their own content, and it's crowdsourcing. Trout Routes is the exact opposite. We actually don't look at, don't know about, and don't utilize any content from anglers. So in our app, you can make your own private notes, your own private markers. You can do anything you want, and none of that is in any way related to our own rating system or our own maps or any of that. So most of what I've learned is just how to be careful about your messaging so that people are aware of what you do and what you don't do as far as crowdsourcing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So basically, yeah, you guys don't utilize. So if you're in the map in Trout Routes and you plug in a point, you're like, oh, this is a fishing spot, right? That's one of the things I was doing that. I was like, oh my God, this is like great water. Plug it in. But that point is not going out anywhere else. Nobody's ever going to see that but me.
Yeah, so exactly. And so any of the points that you see in our map, any of the ratings, it's all from our team. And it's generally, it's exclusively not points where there are holes for fish. It's places where there are exceptional access points to get on the water. That's kind of the key difference. We're not saying this is a great hole. We're saying this is a great place to get on the water. And from there, it's on you, right? So we talk a lot about the kind of the thesis around why a lot of us fly fish is this idea of exploration. And I like to think of Trout Routes as a way to augment and enhance exploration, not a way to replace it. So we're going to bring you to water, and we're going to get you in the water as fast as possible. And once you're there, that's when your journey starts for the day. And from that perspective, it's a great tool. Yeah,
that is really great. So, I mean, some of these questions I'm thinking out maybe are kind of higher level on this because there's probably some confusion too. But like land, like access. Sounds like you guys use publicly access points, but there's also have you guys talked about like navigability and things like that where people there's some places where you can literally step in the river and there's some places you can't step in the river. Is that something people should be listening if they have your app or any other? Do you know much about that topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here in the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, we have essentially keep your feet wet laws. I'm not a lawyer, so be careful.
Yep.
But basically, as long as your feet are wet, you can kind of be on our water in Wisconsin as long as
Up to the high water point or something like that.
yeah, and as long as it's navigable, meaning as long as you
Yep.
can have I think in Wisconsin it's something weird like if it's a kayak and it can float, then it's navigable or something. So what we do for our maps up until basically this month is we show you what land is public and we show you what points are good points to get on the water. Beyond that, it's up to you to understand how you can navigate the water from there in terms of the laws. And we recognize that in a lot of cases, people are exploring new states or new waters and they don't necessarily know the laws. And we know that those are very important. So we have a new feature coming out where we're actually showcasing the high level laws of every state.
Oh,
So you can
nice.
click on a river, see all the public access points. And then if you wanted to know, can I like wade my way up to the next bridge? We'll show you all the laws related to that. So we're starting to really kind of come up with a more comprehensive set of features to inform you on all the aspects of public access.
Nice. There you go. So you guys must be always thinking about this because I'm sure it's like any product. You're always thinking, how do you tweak it and make the next, version better? How has that been? Has there been along the way, I mean, some stumbling blocks where you've been like, oh man, you thought maybe it was going away? Like talk about that. How is that process? Because in 3 years now, I guess we're going on 2018, almost more than 3 years. So you've been doing this. Talk about one of the big kind of downfalls and then maybe one of the big wins along the way.
Oh, that's a good one. I would say one of the major, probably the biggest mistake I've ever made was in the first year when I was getting into the initial product. And I realized from a software and engineering perspective that it would be very easy to make a personal marker optionally public to the rest of the users. So I was like, oh, this would be very interesting, right? You flip a bit in our database and all of a sudden your personal marker, if you so choose, could be made available to the rest of the users. Now, even if someone wanted to do that, is that something that we want to do? And I actually, in the early days, just kind of ran with it and sent it and launched it. And at this time, we had like 1,000 active users or something. And really quickly, those early users were like, you're completely missing it. Like, even if there were people in our community that wanted to make things public, we don't want that. And here are the reasons why. And that was one of the first learnings. I was like, even if people want to do this, we cannot allow it. So we actually don't even allow people to share their content, even if they want to anymore. And that was one of the, the lessons. And I think the takeaway for me, like from a company and brand perspective, is like the value of having someone in our community driving this company and driving this vision is that we actually have strong core values around conservation and around what's good for the industry versus having someone being an outsider coming in and trying to create something. And so we won't get it right every time, but we are always listening and we're always looking to make improvements and kind of correct things if we need to.
Nice. Yeah, that is a great example. So you guys tweaked it early on and realized like, yeah, this is, well, and again, listening to your people, right? Listening to what your customers want and they let you know, and then you followed. That's probably pretty good advice, isn't it, along the way? Is that kind of something you've continued to do, is just listen to your users?
Yeah, up until, so the first 4 years, it was more or less just myself. And so I was software developer, I was mapper, right? So I did all the cartography, all the GIS, but it was also the only point of contact for customer support. So I would be at like a school play or like a, family cabin, and I would randomly get calls from like New York or, Massachusetts or Nebraska. And it sounds like a burden, but it was so cool because you answer the phone and this is someone that's using your product. They're in your community. Half the time you answer and you're just kind of talking fishing stories, right?
Yeah.
Yes, here's the answer to your problem, but like, let's talk fishing, like, have you tried this or that? So that's been a really nice thing, is to kind of stay in tune with your customer. And having 5 full-time employees now, we actually rotate customer support so that we all get a nice flavor of who our customers are. And all of us employees at Trout Routes are actually anglers as well. So we all fly fish and we're all passionate about fly fishing. And then I wanted to say the second story, actually, which is not necessarily overly positive, but another learning. One of the main learnings that I've had is that learning more about the fishing experience and how it varies in different parts of the country. And so the first learning was when we tried to take our core Driftless product, and when I say Driftless, That's the name of the region in the Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa area. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's incredible. But it's very unique because there's thousands and thousands of very good, consistently producing cold water spring-fed fisheries. And there's a lot of access. But when you take Colorado, for example, it's very, very different. It's a lot of freestone. There's some tailwaters, but primarily it's, 20 incredible fisheries, and the rest are either, incremental or they're very intermittent because of snowmelt. And it's a whole different fishing experience. And if you take that to the very far west coast, it's even more different, right? Because now not only are the fisheries inconsistent with their flows, you also have species that are only migratory. So we've had to adapt the product, and we continue to do so, to meet the different fishing styles and needs of the different areas of the country. And that's been pretty interesting. And one small aspect of that has been the complex, complex world of regulations. And unfortunately, I would love to stay out of regulations because it's regulations, but they're actually incredibly important in different parts of the country. So like there's things like delayed harvest in Pennsylvania, and there's like fly fishing only sections in West Virginia. And it was really important for us to be as good or better than any mapping source in your local region. So if we're going to launch our maps in West Virginia, we wanted to make sure that we have as good or more information than you would get from a local, government resource. So we actually have what we believe is almost all the regulations in most of the states we have. So you'll see things like if this section has delayed harvest, or this section is wild A classification in Pennsylvania, or special regs in Wisconsin, or we even have sections in Montana that are closed to floating, for example. So it's very, very complicated, and we don't do it perfectly, but we're making good progress.
That's awesome. So you guys are putting some of the regs in the app. So if you click in there, you can actually see like, okay, I'm here. These are the regulations.
Yeah, and actually, a new feature we're releasing very shortly is one of the things I struggle with in the Midwest is knowing precise dates of when the fishing seasons actually are. So it's one thing to know that there's a special reg on Plum Creek in Nebraska. I'm making it up. But it's very different to know, especially if you're not from that state, that the fishing season is continuous, or the fishing season closes October 15th or December 15th. And so having another layer of information curated by state for seasonality is another feature we're adding in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, this is awesome. And you guys have, so if you look around the entire U.S., so maybe talk about, it sounds like you have all the trout areas. Is this just focused on, we definitely have a chunk of people up in Canada. Is that something that's also covered in the future? Or talk about how you guys expand this. Do you have plans to take over the world and cover everything eventually?
I would love to be 50 years old and still doing this, covering the trout streams of the UK, or I caught myself over the weekend looking at New Zealand.
Right. Good example for you to get out and do some traveling, right?
Some field research.
Yeah.
The office always jokes that I often bring up some random ideas about salt routes. So like taking our core product and trying to do a salt. It's mostly a joke, but it's partly not. So right now we have the lower 48. So we just spent an incredible amount of time trying to get almost perfect maps of every trout stream in the country. Huge feat. There's a lot more work to do, but it's really good. And so I think what we want to do is make sure that our product in that core audience of the lower 48 is, A-, A+. Right. And I think there's still some work to do there.
Yep.
But eventually you'll see us starting to cover like those migratory rivers out west. If you happen to fish for steelhead in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, or the West Coast, you'll know that some of those rivers don't have quote unquote inland trout. And so they're not actually on our maps yet, but we recognize that's a very important use case. So we're actually starting to cover migratory fisheries as well. Eventually, are we going to start covering Alaska? Very much so. We plan to have Alaska before that season starts, which I think is generally April, May. There's actually 3 stocked trout streams in Hawaii. I don't know if anyone knows that.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't find any in Florida, Alabama, or...
Yep. So how many states are there? So out of the 48 you guys have covered, how many don't have trout?
I think there's 3 technically that don't have any trout of any kind. So Florida, Alabama, and I think it's Louisiana. Actually, I take it back. Alabama is one of them that does. They have 3 tailwater stocked fisheries in the northeast Alabama. So I think Florida's one of them, and I think Louisiana's another one. And
Yeah.
can't remember that one.
There you go. God, this is great. So, and I mean, this is it sounds like I'm trying to imagine what your day looks like. Maybe talk about that a little bit. You're the computer guy. I mean, you're all this stuff. What does it look like for you? Are you pretty much working programs, or at this point you're the founder, what does your weekly look like?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, in the first 4 years, it was solo founder, tech founder. So I was the one doing all the mapping, which is a super fun project, right? You get to study places like Nebraska. I heard Jeff Wigner's session with you from a couple weeks ago, and it was really interesting hearing him talk about Nebraska, because people think of Nebraska like there's no way they have, fisheries there. And I remember personally spending weeks going through the same pamphlet that he talked about from the Nebraska State and Wildlife and hand mapping all of the 52 trout streams in Nebraska, as well as all the public access points. And so that was a pretty fun time, right? So my days were learning about states I've never been to and understanding the fisheries there. These days, we have 5 employees. We have Eric, who you know really well, and we have a full marketing team. And then we have dedicated people doing mapping and cartography and software. So at this time, it's more day-to-day, wearing different hats as, a founder.
Right. Yeah, you're the founder. This is good. So, well, let's talk a little bit about, so if somebody wanted to check this out, so you've got this, basically it's an app. Describe that. How does somebody sign up for this thing? Talk about the free versus paid, how all that works.
Yeah, so it's an app. So you can go to the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. There's also a website. So if you want to check it out on your desktop computer, the way that our product works is there's a free version that has, it's completely free, but it has only a couple of features. Generally speaking, what you get for free is all of the lines. There's a bunch of blue lines for every trout stream in the country, which is cool. But everything else is kind of locked up behind our pro level, which is $60 a year for the whole country. And what you get with that is, we have color-coded trout stream lines, which we didn't touch on a lot. But essentially, not only have we mapped out every trout stream in the country, we've actually attempted to apply a proprietary classification system to help people easily differentiate premier waters from marginal waters, which I'm sure you'll have follow-up questions on. And then beyond that, it's public lands, public access points, real-time stream flows, offline maps, a bunch of other cool stuff.
Gotcha. So for essentially $5 per month, you get access to everything. I think about the Onyx. That's one of the things with Onyx. It is definitely nice, but one of the challenges is I think it's like, I don't know, what is like $10 or $20. Something similar, but you only get it by state. I think to get the whole thing, maybe it's a higher cost. Talk about that. How did you guys, is $5? It seems like that's a really low cost for what you guys are offering for the entire country.
Yeah, when we first started the project, we had 7 states covered when we first turned on what we call the paywall, where people pay for access. And at that point, it was Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin. I think Michigan was there, and a few other states in between, South Dakota, the Black Hills. And so at that time, $40 felt like a good introductory price. Since adding the rest of the entire country, we decided to increase our price to kind of match the increased value proposition of the whole country. And so that's where that $60 a year comes in. Onyx is kind of interesting because, obviously they have an awesome product, but they also have really flexible plans where you can do by month or by year. And you can also do the whole country versus state by state. And so one thing that, to their benefit, if you just wanted to fish a state like Washington or California, it would be nice to have a lower price option just for that state. And so we might consider, making a lower price product just for state by state access.
Gotcha. And what about lakes? Are lakes something? I know Stillwater, I'm not sure what percentage. I'd love to talk to you about how many people, because I know it's a smaller demographic or amount of people, but do you guys cover lakes, or what's that look like?
We just started adding a layer where we have points for every lake that has trout. So technically we do have trout lakes now. We haven't really marketed that much, but it is pretty interesting. You can actually, like the Black Hills is a really good example. It's very popular with like family vacations. And so if you're going there, you wouldn't know which of those 10 lakes actually have trout. And there's actually like 4 of them. And using our trout lake layer that many people don't know about. You can see which ones have trout, and you can click on it and see which species and the stocking history and all kinds of cool stuff. So we do have it. It's not a big part of our marketing or our kind of product strategy.
But it's there. So you guys are trying to, like you said, you're trying to cover everything for trout. And what is it? So if you think about it, go back to before Trout Routes. I know there's some other apps out there that have similar stuff, but how would somebody find it back in the day? Like without Trout Routes, like think of all this stuff, right? We have all these tools now. What was I mean, I had my gazetteer. Do you remember those times well? What was that look like? What would you tell, if somebody didn't have this, how did they find their stream?
So we've been doing like a masterclass series where we teach people that exact question. So if you didn't have Trout Routes, or if you wanted to create your own version of Trout Routes on your own, we actually teach people how to do that.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of an odd thing that we do, but we do it anyway. And it can be anything from simply going to your state's, DNR website and figuring out what kind of resources they have. And it ranges anything from like a PDF map to like a stocking table to like a interactive web app to, at times you can go download the plat map for each county and figure out, which parcels are publicly owned by the county or the city. But essentially, the whole value proposition is it could take you months or years to learn as much as you can from an Onyx hunt or a Trout Routes than you could do on your own. So like, it's really kind of just a major time saver.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of states that have really good resources out there. I think the Midwest is high up there. South Dakota is one that I obviously hold close to my heart because that's where I got my first trout, but it had the least amount of public information. So mapping out the trout streams of the Black Hills was actually very interesting and difficult.
That's awesome. I love that you got your first fish in South Dakota because that's definitely one of those in the middle of the country, not as, you don't think of it as the trout as some of the other Western states to the east, right? But it definitely has trout. Like you said, there's only 3 states in the country that don't have trout, which is really cool. So this masterclass is also awesome. I love that you guys are doing this because it shows that you're really into this education. So I always think about that. Like if somebody doesn't pick up your app, how can they still learn something? And it sounds like you can do it, and I remember Onyx when I first learned about that, I was like, well, yeah, you can go get the tax lot information. It's out there, but it's going to take you a long time to sift through it. And so you guys are basically, I mean, I hate to say, the Onyx thing, right? The Onyx of fishing, because Onyx, they don't do, I believe, like the fishing, right? It's more like not at the level you guys do.
They started off obviously with their Onyx Hunt product, actually doing chips like back in 2004, I think.
That's right, the chips. Yep, I remember that.
And then I think around 2012, they kind of flipped into kind of that SaaS, like kind of a pure play SaaS thing with the iPhone obviously came out in 2010-ish around there. And I think they kind of rode that wave into a whole new distribution model where they could take their chip IP and basically deliver it in an app format. And that was kind of a breakthrough for them. And then I think in the last 5 years, they've gone into different verticals. So they have their core stack, if you will, of they're really good at mapping. They're really good at consumer software. And they've taken that and applied it to some other verticals. One of them is Onyx Backcountry. And another one is Onyx Off-Road. And then just the last couple of months, they've launched, or at least they've announced that they're going to get into general fishing. So like think more like lakes and conventional fishing, which is pretty interesting. And so I think they're going to launch that, I think in 2024 from what I can tell. But from what I can tell, I think it's going to be more like incredibly detailed lake maps, bathymetry, more targeted towards like your kind of boat lake use case.
Oh, your boat stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about what you guys have is, like you said, you guys are all fly anglers, and there's something to be said for that when you have that specific knowledge. And it's the same thing at the podcast. I mean, we occasionally talk about topics that are conventional fishing and it's even hunting sometimes, but our bread and butter is fly fishing, and that's what that's what kind of drives everything for us. So I'm sure you guys are probably in a pretty good place given what you have there. So nice. Well, this is good. I wanted to we're going to take it out here in a little bit. I just want to touch base. You mentioned nonprofit. I want to give a shout out. We always love to support conservation groups, nonprofit, and this will kind of get us into the final stage here into some frequently asked questions. I know some other things we missed, but talk about that. You mentioned conservation. Can you give a shout out to a group you're working with or somebody you think folks should know about out here?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff. Number one is we do like 1% of revenue goes to, at this point, it goes to Trout Unlimited. So we do a ton of work. I was actually on the board of a Trout Unlimited chapter in the Twin Cities for a while. So we believe that Trout Unlimited is the top, the most efficient group that does cold water conservation work. And so we just do 1% of revenue, just keep it simple. We also do kind of one-time projects with them in collaboration. They have a couple of events throughout the year where they're trying to kind of promote some of the projects that they do, like dam removals, et cetera. And we actually now are starting to integrate some of their projects inside of our app to raise awareness. So we do a lot of kind of hand-curated kind of co-marketing projects with them. And then we do a lot of work with kind of the smaller groups. There's a group called United Women on the Fly where they're promoting accessibility into fly fishing for females, and so that's a pretty cool project that we're doing. We're also a national partner of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. They're very well known for their initiatives with public access, which we're obviously passionate about. So we're trying to do as much as we can. We try to do both straight up donations as well as co-marketing and kind of collaboration projects.
Nice. Yeah, and we have an episode with Hal Herring. He does the podcast for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and so I'll put that in the show notes as well. And TU obviously has been doing some great stuff. This is really cool. On 1%, so, we recently also had an episode a little while back with Yvonne Chenard and the kind of founder of 1% for the Planet. I'm interested to hear, sounds like, are you guys just kind of doing straight up 1%, not connected to that group, or is this connected to them?
No, we don't do any, I want to, but like we're just cutting checks. Like I would love to kind of be more, like also Jeff Wagner was talking about B Corp, for example. I think there's a lot of cool things that we eventually will do to kind of more formalize our commitment to conservation. But right now it's just kind of like ad hoc, just sending checks.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's awesome. You're doing it. So 1% of revenue, which is exactly what 1% of the planet, does as well, right? 1% of the revenue.
Yeah, not to get into the weeds, but like if you do, 1% of profits or even 5% of profits, like it's not, for us especially, it's not as meaningful because, we're growing a lot and we're not necessarily incredibly profitable, but our top line is pretty strong. So if we just do, 1% of revenue, we felt it's more representative of our commitment.
That's right. No, that's really awesome. And we'll put some links to the other things we talked about here, masterclass, things like that. But talk about what else we missed here. I think that, again, somebody's listening now, they can go into their app right now and just search for Trout Routes, and they can download it for free, check it out, take it for a spin, sort of thing. But anything else you want to highlight that we haven't talked about here that describes either maybe some tips for people using it or why it's valuable?
I mean, the biggest thing is that we're extremely laser focused on moving trout waters, and we're going to continue getting better and better at curated content. And anything that you want to know about fly fishing, we're going to have in that app so that you don't need to leave it for looking at regulations or understanding how to fish a water or et cetera. So we're connecting people with fly shops. We hand curated every fly shop in the country, as well as all kinds of other tips and tricks for each river. And so as part of that, we get really involved with the community. So in this, in the winter season, as you know, there's the intense fly fishing expo season. And this year in 2023, we went to, I think it was like 16 fly fishing shows between the 5 of us in 2.5 months. So it's super intense. And we're actually going to do it again this next winter. So
nice.
We'll likely be at a town near your listeners. And we love, engaging with people, getting ideas, getting feedback from customers. And it's always a great time.
This is great. So you're going to be out there at all the shows, and we could connect with you. Folks and that's another way, is that if they want to have any questions or maybe just stop by the booth and say hi, they can check in there with you. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, quick kind of rap sheet is like there's one in Minneapolis, there's one in Detroit, Boston, there's one in New Jersey, Denver, Seattle, there's one in Utah, Oregon, Iowa. I think that's one in Atlanta too.
Yep, that's the majority of them. There you go. And talk about that. So any other frequently asked questions? We mentioned, I think, a couple of them today, but anything else that would shed light on people that are still interested but unsure about, taking the time to download this?
Biggest thing is that, there is a free, like when you first come in, there's a free 24 hours given to everyone. So you download the app, you sign up. there's no strings attached. There's no credit card or anything. You just get 24 hours of that pro to kind of get a feel for the value proposition. And one of the coolest things that I've experienced is going to these fly fishing shows and talking to someone that's never heard of trout routes, and they hear our pitch. And when we say that we have, every trout stream mapped out, they immediately say, okay, good luck with that. But what they do is they test us, and that we intentionally set it up so it's a test. And every single time they walk up to our demo iPad and they type in a river that only they know about, a river that shouldn't even be on any map, and they type it in, and what we show is more insightful information on what part of that river is public than they previously knew about, even though it's their own home water. So the main suggestion is to give it a shot, be open-minded, and kind of get into it and just see for yourself.
Yeah, that's it. That's why it's powerful, because not knowing, you're always unsure. You don't want to trespass. That's not good. So this gives you a thing in your pocket where you can be sure, like, hey, this is good. This is public water, and I'm good to go. So that's a good peace of mind out there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Well, I got a couple random ones, then we'll take it out here. I always love to kind of dig into a few here just to, have some fun. So you mentioned tacos. I love tacos as well. So what's your taco fetish here? Are you a Taco Bell guy, or is this like special? Any town you go to, you have to have a taco?
So we got our first office. It's about a year and a half ago. It's in Northeast Minneapolis, and I didn't plan this, but it's 2 blocks from a place called Centro Taco, and it's like horrible for the wallet because I go there almost every day. And the team makes fun of me because I think I've been there however many times and I've never ordered anything different. and it's always just a simple, I think it's just a beef, street taco. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't do Taco Bell. It's just street tacos are my thing.
Yeah. And what does it describe? What is a street taco? Like, what does that entail?
It's like cilantro, onions, protein, and corn tortilla. Super simple.
That's it. God, I know the cilantro is the same thing, man. The basic taco is great. So,
Dave, do you want to hear my next startup idea?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So it's going to be an app that tells you where in real time where all the taco trucks are in your community.
Oh man, that would be good. I've been asking the questions occasionally on here because I love the food. And just like you're traveling somewhere, right? You're out there, oh my gosh, I'm fishing, I need some food, there's pizza. But if I knew where the taco trucks were, in fact, I want to give a shout out to, Taco, I'm trying to think of the name. We had an episode where one of the guys down in California, he makes a deal to stop by all the taco places, and he was mentioning the same thing.
I don't think it's got any legs for a startup idea, but I love the idea of it.
That is a great idea. Good. All right. So we know tacos are good. So let's talk music. Let's talk podcasts. What do you listen to more of if you're on the road, if you're in a plane or traveling? Do you listen to more music or podcasts?
I guess probably podcasts. The thing about me is I'm kind of like a all in or nothing at all kind of a person, for good or worse. And so in the last 5 years being in a startup, I've kind of been all in. And so if I'm not working and I work a lot, I'm usually, doing research about something related to startups. So there's a couple of podcasts that I listen to that are extremely pertinent to what I'm doing. One of them is called the Sub Pub podcast by Revenue Cat. A lot of cool insights on like how to engage with users and how to kind of drive adoption of your core product and stuff like that. So pretty boring for fly fishing, but I just kind of at this time I'm pretty deep into the startup world.
Yeah, there you go. No, I love that's always awesome to get. I mean, that's the thing I am too. I mean, I love the fishing and everything and podcasts about podcasts and things, but I love just the random. I've got a new random episode or a new podcast I'm listening to now that's totally random, but it's always fun. So good. Oh, and talk about the Driftless. Let's take it out here in the Driftless. You are from that area. We're actually trying to set up a trip out there, I think, to the Driftless Angler, hopefully. But talk about, for those, and we've had a few episodes, but what do you love about it? What keeps you in the Driftless area?
So it's a really unique place. I think the folks over at Driftless Angler would describe it. I've heard them describe it a lot more articulate, but essentially it's a massive area in southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, and northeast Iowa. It's kind of a corner of those 3 states. And essentially it's a massive area of primarily limestone, spring-fed creeks, which means there's a ton of water. They produce very consistently because they're fed from springs. And it's not like there's one major river that's super productive, like the South Platte or like some of the major rivers out west. There's a ton of water. There's a ton of creeks. They're all pretty good. They're all amazingly gorgeous. They're in these canyons around, not canyons, they're in these valleys around some of these really cool looking farms in, the Midwest farm scene. So it's just a really, really cool place, consistently producing. And the amount of water to fish is extremely vast. So there's no shortage of water to fish where you can escape the crowds.
Perfect. Yeah, and we will follow up on that too if we get to the Driftless. We'll test you on your Driftless, your local knowledge. We'll have the app, and we'll be able to get out there and with Jerry, hopefully get on these streams. I'm really excited for that trip. Cool, Zach. Well, we will send everybody out to troutroutes.com, or just go to the App Store and just search for Trout Routes. Does that sound like the best thing for people who want to connect with us?
Yep, pretty easy to find us.
Perfect. All right. We will do that, Zach, and looking forward to keeping in touch and digging in more to the app as we go. So I appreciate all your time today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
That is a wrap. You can grab all of the show notes at wetflyswing.com. And please follow us on Instagram and share this episode out with someone you love. Please send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, if you have any feedback or want us to put together an episode on this podcast for you. Check in anytime. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and would love to meet up with you on the water. We have new fly fishing schools going all year long and all around the country. So if you want to connect, let's do it right now. All right, time to get out of here. I hope you have a great evening. I hope you have a great morning or great afternoon wherever in the world you are. And I appreciate you for stopping by and checking out the show today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.